The lie began with the light. It was a searing, artificial gold that drenched the stage, bleaching away every shadow and imperfection until the entire set gleamed with a reality too clean to be true. It was the light of manufactured triumph, and under its relentless glare, Donald Trump was king. He leaned back in his plush armchair, a master of his domain, letting the wave of applause wash over him. It wasn't just noise, it was sustenance, the validation he craved more than air. He beamed at the sea of expectant faces filling the theater, flashing the smile that had become a marvel of political engineering, honed over 1,000 rallies, calibrated to project invincibility, and practiced in the mirror until it was as much a weapon as it was an expression. His voice, a familiar blend of Carnival Barker and Sovereign, rolled through the auditorium. "Look at my family," he declared, a proud sweep of his hand encompassing the cameras, the nation, and the very idea of American success. The best family in America, smart, beautiful, successful. Nobody has a family like mine. The applause swelled again, but this time, something was different. It was the polite applause of people who had been told they were at a victory rally, but couldn't shake the feeling that the war wasn't over. A subtle hesitation rippled through the room, a hiccup in the collective heartbeat. For a moment, the rhythm of clapping faltered, then picked up again, as if the audience was trying to convince itself that this was still business as usual. It was a sound so faint that only the most attentive would have noticed, but in the sterile perfection of the studio, it was a flaw, the first tiny crack in the golden facade. Across from him, an island of stillness in a sea of motion, sat Jasmine Crockett. She did not applaud, she did not smile. Her posture was a study in defiance, straight and unyielding, her gaze calm but so piercing it seemed to dissect the very air between them. In her lap rested a simple manila folder, thin and unassuming, yet it held the gravity of a ticking bomb. She tapped a single finger against it, a quiet, rhythmic beat that cut through the fading applause. Each tap was a tick of a clock counting down to an explosion. And then there was Ivanka. Seated in the second row, she was the living embodiment of her father's boast, poised, elegant, every strand of her blonde hair sculpted into place. Her smile was a work of art, designed for boardrooms and galas, a mask of serene loyalty. Her presence was meant to be the final, irrefutable proof, a flawless daughter for a flawless family. But perfection is a fragile thing, and tonight, the cracks were already beginning to show. A stiffness held her shoulders, a faint, almost imperceptible strain at the corners of her mouth, as if the smile had been affixed with glue rather than feeling. She was a porcelain doll, beautiful and immaculate, unaware that the slightest tremor could shatter her completely. The last echo of applause faded, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The air, once filled with manufactured energy, grew heavy and still. In that silence, every rustle of fabric, every soft cough, became a sound of consequence. It was into this charged quiet that Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, not with aggression, but with the deliberate grace of a surgeon about to make the first incision. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it possessed a clarity that sliced through the tension like a blade through silk. "Mr. Trump," she began, the words measured and cool, "you speak of family as if it is an image carved in stone, unbreakable, untouchable." She paused, letting the metaphor settle over the room. Her eyes never left his, holding him in a gaze that was neither hostile nor forgiving, but simply expectant. "But what if that image isn't the whole truth? What if your perfect picture has cracks?" The room went dead silent. It was not the reverent silence of an audience captivated by a performance, but the sharp, breathless silence of a crowd witnessing an impending collision. For a single unguarded moment, Trump's practiced smile faltered. A flicker of genuine surprise, or was it alarm, crossed his features before being instantly buried under layers of practiced indignation. A laugh erupted from him, but it was a harsh, brittle sound, too loud and too sudden. It didn't warm the room, it fractured the air. "Oh, here we go," he boomed, turning to the audience as if sharing a private joke. "Fake news again, ladies and gentlemen. This is all they do. Lies, lies, and more lies." He wagged a finger, first at Jasmine, then at the cameras, slipping effortlessly into the role he knew best, the persecuted warrior besieged by a hostile world. "This woman," he sneered, the scorn dripping from his voice. "She's obsessed with me, obsessed with my family. It's pathetic, really. Sad." But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't react. She remained a portrait of unnerving composure, her hand resting gently on the folder in her lap. It was a gesture that seemed both casual and menacing, as if she were touching a loaded weapon she had no immediate intention of firing, but wanted everyone to know was there. The cameras, drawn to the magnetic pull of this unspoken conflict, began to cut between them with increasing frequency. They captured Trump's flushed cheeks, the performative anger in his eyes, and then swung back to Jasmine's unwavering calm. And then, for a split second, the lens zoomed in on Ivanka. The diplomatic smile was still perfectly in place, a placid mask for the millions watching at home, but the camera saw what the naked eye might have missed. Her hands, resting gracefully in her lap, had tightened almost imperceptibly. Her knuckles, pressed hard against the expensive fabric of her dress, had turned a ghostly white. It was a fleeting, involuntary betrayal, a flicker of fear in the flawless machine. The applause had stopped entirely now. No one was clapping, no one was cheering. They were watching, waiting, and for the first time that night, the stage belonged not to the man who shouted the loudest, but to the woman who held the silence. Sensing the subtle shift in the room's energy, the way the silence had begun to weigh more than the applause, Trump did what he always did when cornered. He got louder. His voice took on the cadence of a rally speech, each word a hammer blow meant to rebuild the fortress around his family. "My family is the strongest," he boomed, leaning into the microphone. "My children are incredible. Ask anyone. Ivanka, Don, Eric, they are the most successful kids in the world. No scandals, nothing but greatness. That's the truth." He delivered the lines like a mantra, a shield of superlatives meant to deflect any incoming attack. But the louder he grew, the more the silence around him seemed to deepen, absorbing his words until they hung hollow in the air. Jasmine waited for him to finish, her patience a weapon in itself. When his declaration finally exhausted itself, she spoke again, her voice soft but with a surgical precision that made it feel 10 times louder than his shouting. "If it's the truth, Mr. Trump," she said, her tone almost gentle, "then you won't mind if we ask your daughter a few questions." The suggestion was a masterstroke of political theater. It was not an accusation, but a simple proposition, one that could not be refused without implying there was something to hide. The camera, like a predator sensing a shift in the herd, swiveled instantly. The lens zoomed, the focus tightened, and in a fraction of a second, Ivanka Trump was no longer a spectator in the second row, but the central figure on a global stage, pinned by a circle of unforgiving light. The studio audience held its breath, a collective intake of air that seemed to suck the very sound out of the room. Ivanka's smile remained, but it looked different now under the intense scrutiny. It was no longer a symbol of serene confidence, but a mask of porcelain, brittle, fragile, and threatening to crack under. The immense pressure of the moment. Her lips parted slightly, a silent promise of the denial everyone expected, the word that would diffuse the tension and restore order. The world waited. Seconds stretched into an eternity. No sound emerged. She simply sat there, her eyes wide for an instant, with a look of pure, unshielded panic before she locked them into a mask of placid stillness. But the stillness was not calm. It was the rigid paralysis of fear. The silence screamed. The tension in the room became unbearable, a physical force pressing down on every chest. Trump turned toward her, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. He had expected her support, a swift and elegant dismissal of the challenge. He had expected his flawless daughter. But Ivanka offered nothing. She offered only that terrible, damning silence. It was in that silence that the entire studio felt a crack open. It was not a sound, but a feeling, subtle yet seismic. A collective murmur, like the rustling of 1,000 dry leaves, rippled through the audience. The cameras, hungry for the truth, cut from Ivanka's frozen face to Jasmine. For the first time all night, Jasmine Crockett allowed herself the faintest trace of a smile. She had struck her first blow, not with an accusation, but with a question, and the silence that followed was more damning than any evidence she could ever reveal. Ivanka's silence lingered in the air, thick and acrid, like smoke after a gunshot. It was no longer a simple pause, but a statement in itself, a void that demanded to be filled. In the control room, producers whispered frantically into headsets, their professional instincts screaming to let the moment breathe. This wasn't just good television, it was a public unraveling. Jasmine Crockett leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp, like a predator that had tasted blood and was now ready to press its advantage. She had seen the flicker of panic, the hesitation, the crack in the armor. Now, it was time to drive the wedge deeper. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice even and disarmingly calm, yet commanding the attention of the entire room. "You speak of truth, of family pride. Yet, when your daughter is given the chance to affirm that truth, she remains silent. Why is that?" The words fell like stones into the quiet room. Trump, caught off guard by the directness of the question, tried to laugh it off. But it wasn't the booming, self-assured laugh of a man in control. It was a shallow, nervous chuckle, the sound of someone desperately trying to buy time. "Oh, please." He waved a dismissive hand, the gesture too broad, too theatrical. "She doesn't need to dignify these lies with an answer. She's a classy woman. She doesn't play your little games." Jasmine's expression didn't change. "Games? This isn't a game, Mr. Trump. This is about the truth your voters, your supporters, the American people deserve to know. If it's all a lie, as you claim, then why not let Ivanka say so? Just one word from her, one simple denial, and this entire matter would be put to rest." The audience shifted in their seats, the quiet murmuring growing louder. Some exchanged looks of disbelief. Others leaned forward, captivated by the raw, unfolding drama. Trump's face flushed a deep bottled red. He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, his hand trembling slightly. "You see, folks, this is what they do. They attack my family. They attack my children. They'll do anything to try and bring me down. It's disgraceful." His voice thundered through the studio, but for the first time the thunder felt hollow. Usually his anger was a weapon that energized crowds and rallied the faithful. But tonight, in the sterile confines of this studio, his words seemed to bounce off the impenetrable walls of silence. The audience wasn't cheering. They were listening, watching, analyzing. That terrified him more than any booing ever could. Jasmine was relentless. She leaned in, her tone sharpening with surgical precision. "I'll ask again, Mr. Trump. Are you prepared to tell the American people that the image of your family is without cracks? Can you look into that camera?" She pointed directly at the main lens, the unblinking red eye of judgment. "And swear that everything you've told them is true?" He bristled, his jaw tightening. For a moment it looked as though he might lunge forward. Instead, he slammed his palm on the table, the sound echoing through the studio. "Absolutely," he barked. "My family is perfect, stronger than any of yours." He turned to the audience, his eyes scanning for the expected applause. None came, not a single clap. The silence was deafening. Jasmine let it do its work, then struck again. "Then let's ask Ivanka once more," she said, her voice steady. "Ivanka, do you wish to deny the secret I'm about to reveal?" The camera cut sharply to Ivanka. The mask was slipping. Her eyes darted briefly toward her father, then back to the floor. And still, she said nothing. The audience gasped, audibly this time. The weight of her silence was no longer a question. It was an answer. The tension in the studio had grown so dense it was almost tangible, a suffocating weight pressing down on every breath. Every eye seemed fixed on the thin folder in Jasmine's lap, as if its cardboard cover held the power to rewrite everything the audience thought they knew. Trump's chest rose and fell rapidly, his usual bluster feeling strained, his anger less a weapon and more a brittle shield. He pointed at Jasmine, his voice booming but unsteady. "Don't you dare wave that garbage around. Everyone knows you've got nothing. A folder? Please, anyone can bring a folder." But his words failed to land. The audience wasn't cheering. They weren't laughing. They were waiting. Then, from the third row, a single point of light appeared in the darkness. A man had raised his phone, its glowing screen aimed at the stage like a weapon of public record. He was live streaming. A woman next to him saw, and her phone went up too. A ripple effect spread through the rows, and in seconds dozens of phones lit up the shadowy corners of the studio, their small lenses transforming every audience member into a broadcaster. The confrontation was no longer contained. It was being beamed out into the world, raw and unfiltered. In living rooms across the country, phones buzzed on coffee tables. Notifications popped up on screens. Live. Trump confronted by Jasmine Crockett. Chaos erupts. Millions tuned in, drawn by the irresistible pull of high-stakes drama, hungry for spectacle, for truth. Twitter erupted in a storm of digital commentary. Hashtags formed in real time, coalescing out of the ether like storm clouds. Had Trump family secret? Had Ivanka silent? Had Jasmine strikes? The story had gone viral before the folder had even been opened. Jasmine, keenly aware of this shift, leaned forward slightly, ensuring her composed face filled the frame of every phone aimed her way. "The American people deserve honesty, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice carrying the weight of the millions now listening. "And if you won't give it to them, this folder will." Trump's eyes darted around the room, no longer just a stage, but a gallery of judging eyes and recording lenses. He searched for rescue, from the host, from the audience, from his daughter. He turned toward Ivanka, his voice softening, cracking with a new, desperate vulnerability. "Honey," he said, almost pleading, Tell them it's all lies. You know it is. You know better than anyone." All eyes, both in the studio and across the globe, swiveled toward Ivanka. The cameras caught every detail. The way she inhaled sharply, the way her eyes flickered to the folder, then back to her father. She opened her mouth, and for a fleeting instant, the world thought the spell would break. But again, no words came. Only silence. It was devastating. The murmurs in the audience grew louder now, no longer hushed whispers but a low, static hum of doubt that filled the studio. "Why won't she deny it?" someone muttered. "What's in that folder?" another whispered. Trump snapped. He stood up, towering over the table, his composure shattered. "This is a disgrace. You're a disgrace," he roared at Jasmine. "You think you can scare my family? You think you can scare me?" Jasmine remained seated, her calm a stark contrast to his fury. Finally, the host intervened, his voice shaky. "Mr. Trump, Miss Crockett, let's try to keep this civil." But the moment had already spiraled out of his control. The studio was no longer his stage. It belonged to Jasmine, to the folder, and to the deafening silence of Ivanka Trump. The second commercial break did nothing to cool the fire. It had only given the world time to catch up. When the broadcast returned, the air in the studio was different. It had hardened. The audience no longer played the part of polite spectators. They sat like jurors, their faces grim, waiting for the evidence, waiting for the hammer to fall. Trump tried to seize the moment, forcing a wide, almost manic grin. "You see, folks," he began, his voice too cheery, "we've got the greatest economy, and yes, the greatest family. And no folder," he jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, "is going to change that." He laughed too loudly, a brittle sound that shattered against the room's stony silence. No one joined him. Jasmine didn't wait. She leaned forward, her hands pressing flat against the folder. The audience seemed to hold its collective breath, leaning in as if her movement alone commanded them. Slowly, deliberately, she slid the folder to the center of the table. "This isn't about businesses, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice sharp. "This is about trust. And tonight, I intend to show America the proof." The studio gasped. Trump's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of fury. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare open that folder! It's fake! Everyone knows it's fake!" Jasmine ignored him. She flipped the folder open. The sound of paper sliding against cardboard echoed in the silence, absurdly loud, like the tearing of sacred fabric in a cathedral. She lifted the first page, a photocopy of an old, typewritten document, and held it up so the cameras could see. "This," she announced, her voice ringing with authority, "is a legal record. It documents a matter long buried, long hidden, and it raises questions Mr. Trump has refused to answer for decades." The host paled, fumbling his cue cards. The cameras zoomed in. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens as screenshots were already being shared and dissected across Twitter. Trump lurched forward, his hands slamming down on the table. "That's not proof. That's a lie." but his voice shook, his volume betraying a deep-seated fear. Jasmine calmly lowered the paper and pulled out the next sheet. It was a photograph. The image was black and white, old and grainy, but the resemblance was unmistakable, the implication immediate and shattering. She raised it slowly, letting the audience, the cameras, and the world see. "Sometimes," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "a picture is worth more than any denial." The studio erupted. Gasps, shouts, the rustle of people jolting in their seats. Hundreds of phone flashes went off at once, lighting the room in a chaotic strobe effect. Online, the photograph exploded across timelines, trending faster than any hashtag before it. Trump's voice broke as he shouted, "That's nothing! Old photos, fake documents, it's all garbage!" But his fury only amplified the suspicion. And then, like clockwork, the cameras cut to Ivanka. She sat frozen, staring at the photo in Jasmine's hand. Her lips parted slightly, her throat tightening as if to choke back a cry. Her hand gripped the armrest again, her knuckles straining. The audience saw it, the world saw it. A single glistening tear formed at the corner of her eye. She blinked rapidly, fighting it back, but it was too late. And then, in the back of the room, a lone voice shouted clear and damning, "She knows it's true!" The words pierced the noise, echoed across the room, and landed like a verdict. The story had not just escaped the studio, it had conquered the globe. It was no longer a piece of American political theater, but a contagion of silent doubt, spreading across time zones and continents. In the buzzing control rooms of major news networks, producers screamed into headsets as editors scrambled to cut and replay the explosive footage. This was a moment that transcended language, a human drama playing out on the most public of stages. On CNN, the breaking news chyron flashed across the screen. Ivanka Trump remains silent on explosive allegations live. On MSNBC, a panel of stunned commentators framed it as the silence heard around the world. Even Fox News, normally a bastion of defense, was forced to cut to the footage, their anchors fumbling for a narrative as the image of Ivanka's tear-streaked face played on a loop. Across the Atlantic, the story hit with the force of a shockwave. The BBC interrupted its programming, a London-based analyst shaking his head in disbelief. "This is no longer about allegations," he said gravely. "It's about optics. And tonight, Ivanka Trump's silence is the most damning optic I have ever seen in politics." In Berlin, Germany's Der Spiegel splashed a headline across its midnight edition. "The daughter is silent, and the silence destroys him." In Paris, Le Monde called it Le Scandale du Silence, the scandal of silence. Back in the studio, the host's earpiece buzzed relentlessly with these updates. His eyes widened as producers shouted the breaking news into his ear. He glanced at his cards, then up at the cameras, his voice trembling as he spoke. We are being told right now that this broadcast has become the most watched live program in the world. Hundreds of millions are tuning in, not just here in America, but across Europe, Asia, everywhere. Tonight's silence has become a global moment." The audience gasped. Trump's face drained of all color, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the entire world had just settled upon them. "Global moment," he muttered, his voice a hoarse whisper caught by the microphone. "This is a disgrace. The whole world is laughing at us. They're laughing at me." But Jasmine saw her chance. She leaned into her microphone, her words crisp and steady. "The world isn't laughing, Mr. Trump. The world is listening, and what they are hearing is silence, a silence more powerful than any of your denials." The cameras cut back to Ivanka, her tear-streaked face, her trembling lips, her unbroken silence. It was an image too powerful to be drowned by shouting. On Twitter, the global conversation was relentless. A French parliamentarian tweeted, "Even silence is testimony." In the United States, a prominent senator broke the dam. His tweet appeared at the top of millions of feeds. "It's time for an investigation. The silence is no longer acceptable." Within minutes, had "Investigate Now" trended worldwide. The host's earpiece buzzed again. He swallowed hard. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are being told that members of Congress are now calling for an emergency inquiry based on what is happening here tonight." The audience erupted. Trump's face went white. He slammed his fist on the table. "No! No! You can't do this! You won't take me down over silence! Over nothing!" But the more he shouted, the smaller he looked. Jasmine stayed calm, her voice deliberate. "It's not silence that's bringing you down, Mr. Trump. It's what that silence represents. The truth you cannot outrun." The studio lights seemed to dim, as if even the electrical grid could feel the suffocating weight of the moment. The restless chatter of the audience had died down again, leaving only the soft thrum of cameras and the electric hum of a world holding its breath. Jasmine Crockett shifted forward in her chair, her movements slow and deliberate. Her voice, when she spoke, dropped lower, carrying the gravity of a final judgment. She was no longer addressing Donald Trump. Her gaze, and the gaze of millions, was fixed solely on his daughter. "Mr. Trump, you've had every chance to speak," she began, her tone somber. "You've shouted, you've denied, you've insulted. But I think we've been asking the wrong person." The cameras, as if guided by a single thought, swung in unison toward Ivanka. Her pale face filled the screen on the studio monitors and in millions of living rooms across the globe. Jasmine's voice was steady, but it was the steely calm of a prosecutor before a verdict. "Ivanka," she said, the name hanging in the air, "the world has one question for you. Is it true?" The question was a singularity, pulling all the chaos, all the speculation, and all the tension of the night into one unbearable point. The audience leaned forward collectively, a single organism of anticipation. Not a cough, not a whisper, just the sound of 1,000 breaths being held. Trump whipped toward his daughter, raw panic etched across his features. "Don't you dare answer that," he hissed, his voice a ragged whisper of command. "Don't you say a word. This is a setup, Ivanka. You know better than to play into their hands." But the desperate plea only confirmed the stakes. It was no longer a denial, it was an order to maintain the lie. Ivanka's hands trembled visibly now. She clasped them together so tightly in her lap that the cameras caught the strain in her white knuckles. Her lips part, then closed again. Her eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, seemed to plead for an escape that did not exist. The host, sensing history, swallowed hard. "Miss Trump," he stammered, "this is your opportunity. You can remain silent, or you can speak." The world waited. Ivanka closed her eyes for a long moment, as if to block out the lights, the cameras, her father's desperate gaze. A single tear finally broke free and slid down her cheek. She inhaled a deep, shuddering breath, then turned her head slightly, not toward her father, but toward Jasmine, as though the Congresswoman's composure was the only anchor in the storm. Then, in the faintest whisper, a sound so small it was almost swallowed by the silence, she mouthed a word. The microphones barely caught the vibration, but the audience members in the front row heard it. They gasped, hands flying to their mouths, their shock a wave that rolled backward through the room. The word was small, but it was seismic. "Yes." The studio erupted. It was not a sound of debate or murmur, but of detonation. Screams, shouts, reporters scrambling from their seats, phones flashing in a chaotic frenzy. The control room director shouted into earpieces, "Repeat it, loop it, zoom in on her lips." Trump froze, his mouth hanging open, his face a mask of utter disbelief, as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. "No," he stammered, shaking his head. No, that's not what she said. She didn't mean it." But Ivanka didn't correct herself. She didn't retract. She simply lowered her head into her trembling hands, her shoulders shaking under the crushing weight of what she had just done. Jasmine sat back slowly, her expression both solemn and vindicated. The darkest family secret was no longer a rumor. It was the truth. The moment Ivanka's whispered yes registered, the studio did not just erupt, it detonated. What had been a tense political stage transformed into a battlefield of raw, unrestrained human emotion. The carefully constructed artifice of television production shattered. The audience surged with a cacophony of sound, shrieks, shouts, and gasps colliding into a single, deafening roar. Camera operators struggled to hold their frames as people leaped from their seats, pointing, recording with their phones, their faces a mixture of shock and vindication. Donald Trump's face, flushed a deep, volcanic scarlet, contorted in a mask of pure fury. He shot to his feet, pounding the desk with both fists so hard that his microphone squealed with feedback. Liars! He roared, his voice cracking, the familiar bark of authority, now a raw screech of a cornered animal. You're all liars. This is a coordinated attack. My daughter is being manipulated. She's under duress. The host, visibly rattled and pale, raised a hand. Mr. Trump, please. No, don't please me, he spat, jabbing a trembling finger toward the cameras, toward the world. You're all complicit in this. This is treason. The fake news machine, the radical Democrats, the deep state. They want to destroy me, destroy my family, and now they're using my own daughter to do it. But the more he shouted, the clearer his desperation became. For decades, he had mastered chaos, thrived in it, bent it to his will. But this was different. He was no longer orchestrating the storm. He was being swallowed by it. His words, once magnetic to millions, now ricocheted uselessly against the uproar. Jasmine Crockett remained seated, a pillar of calm in the hurricane. Her posture was unchanged, her expression cool as marble. She let him rage. She understood that every scream, every frantic accusation was merely fuel for her point. The truth, finally outlasted the denial. Ivanka sat frozen, her hands still covering her face as if to shield herself from the fallout of her own word. She didn't look at her father. She didn't look at Jasmine. She didn't look at anyone. The single syllable she had spoken had drained her of all strength, leaving only a hollow, trembling silence in its wake. Reporters in the press section shouted over one another, desperate to seize the moment. Mr. Trump, are you confirming the secret is true? Congresswoman Crockett, what is your next move? Trump swung toward them, his face twisted. Shut up! Shut up, all of you! Online, the reaction was instantaneous. Headlines appeared in real time. Ivanka confirms family secret live. Trump meltdown on national TV. Crockett corners the dynasty. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers huddled in offices, glued to their screens. Even Trump's staunchest allies whispered among themselves, could this be the end? The host tried one last time to regain control. Ladies and gentlemen, please. But Jasmine interrupted softly, not with anger, but with a statement that cut sharper than Trump's roar. This isn't treason, she said, her voice clear and steady. This is the truth. And truth, Mr. Trump, doesn't need permission to exist. The audience erupted again, this time in a wave of applause, a chant rising like a rally cry. Truth! 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 Trump staggered as if physically struck, his eyes darting wildly. He slammed his fists against the desk one last time. This isn't over, he barked. You'll all pay for this. But even his threats felt smaller now, drowned beneath the thunder of voices demanding an answer he could no longer control. The broadcast ended not with applause, but with an uneasy echoing silence that followed the storm. When the lights finally faded and the broadcast became history, what remained was not the shouting, nor even the scandal itself, but the profound and haunting echo of what had been left unsaid. The story was no longer confined to the sterile studio. It had become a national reckoning, a conversation whispered in kitchens and debated in late-night diners. Donald Trump's camp scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing frantic statements claiming Ivanka's words were misheard, manipulated, or torn from context. He himself called into news outlets, his voice hoarse with fury, declaring it the greatest witch hunt in American history. Yet his protests carried none of the authority they once did. They sounded like the exhausted cries of a man fighting shadows, his power diminished not by an attack, but by a whisper from within his own fortress. Ivanka, meanwhile, vanished. There were no public statements, no carefully curated social media posts, no attempts at clarification. Her silence deepened the mystery and cemented the verdict. Was it guilt? Was it quiet defiance? Or was it the unbearable weight of loyalty and truth finally colliding? The absence of her voice became its own confession, one that no strategist or spin doctor could erase. Her stillness carried more impact than any speech she might have given, leaving a vacuum that the world rushed to fill with its own interpretations. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, emerged from the storm with a new kind of stature. Her unwavering composure became the image replayed on every network, a congresswoman who did not need to shout, who let her opponent unravel by his own hand, who simply opened a door and allowed the truth to walk through. Overnight, she became a symbol of poise and persistence, her words quoted on protest signs, her calm resolve held up as proof that the loudest defenses could be pierced by quiet determinate. Shaw. But the true shift was felt not on the debate stage or within the halls of power, but among ordinary people. The moment forced a reckoning. In dynasties built on spectacle and sound, the refusal to speak could dismantle everything. Commentators gave the night a name, the Night of Silence. To some, it marked the fracture of a political empire. To others, it was the awakening of a new demand for accountability, a moment when the public decided that silence could no longer be mistaken for strength. Trump's voice continued to rage in the weeks and months that followed, but the memory that endured was not his fury. It was the image of his daughter's trembling stillness, her knuckles white against the chair, her eyes betraying a truth she could not bring herself to deny. When asked about it later, Jasmine Crockett said little. "I didn't destroy a family," she told an interviewer softly. "I only held up a mirror. What they saw inside, that was for them and for the world to judge." And in that single remark, she captured what millions already knew, that sometimes, in politics as in life, silence is not weakness, but revelation. It does not ask for permission, and it does not offer forgiveness. It simply lingers, echoing longer and louder than any shouted defense, reshaping everything we thought we knew. The story was never about the folder or the photograph, or even the secret. It was about the silence that followed, a silence that roared,